Story 1. Gray. I've tried everything I can think of. Enough is enough. I first noticed the thing when I looked up at my window after taking a short night-time walk. At first, I reasoned that it was just my mom putting something in my room. But as I came closer and looked harder, I saw its shape was hardly feminine, hardly even human. That stood in my window was a tall, skinny figure, completely nude and lanky like a teenager, its skin the color gray. It stood taller than I did, and it looked down from my window at me whenever I was outside of my house. Its face was more humanoid than the rest of it, as it had a mouth, a nose, and two eyes, the whites of which shone like dimmed car headlights. It had an expression that was hard to read, fear mixed with exuberation, and entirely psychotic. The first night I saw it, it just stared down at me. It didn't move at all. I didn't move at all. I couldn't. I was dumbfounded by its presence. I felt a sneaking dread climb up my spine, and it settled on my neck. My mother and sister were in the house with that monster. I ran for the door. When I burst through, nothing was amiss. My family members sat downstairs, watching television, as they always did. Panting, I stood before the screen and looked at them, wondering how they couldn't have noticed someone breaking into our home. Looks of concern showed on both their faces. "What's the matter?" my mom asked, frowning. "There's someone upstairs," I exclaimed. "What?" she cried, her voice raised. "How can that be? I saw him in my window." Without waiting for them to follow, I stormed up the stairs, determined to catch the criminal. I took a baseball bat from the closet on the way, and with a moment's hesitation, I exploded into my bedroom. The gray being had inexplicably vanished, gone without any trace. I checked my sister's room, my mother's room, every bathroom, and closet and pantry I could. The thing had disappeared. Somehow, its vanishing disturbed me more than its being here. That night I barely slept, waiting for it to emerge from some excellent hiding spot. It never did. After then, I've looked up to my window when I was outside, and every time I saw the thing glaring down at me like I was the freak. Sometimes I locked eyes with it, making frightening gestures to try to stare it down and scare it off, but it never affects it. It just stood there watching, waiting. After a week of seeing it whenever I walked my dog late at night, and even during the day, when I looked up from car as I parked it in the driveway, I resolved to do something. What a mistake. First, I tried shutting the blinds and turning off the light before I went to tea with my dog. Sure enough, when I glanced up at my window, the thing stood as it had before, with the blinds completely up and the light juxtaposing its gray mass against the yellow-colored room. When I climbed back up to my bedroom, the shades were as I had put them. I started to feel crazy and unsafe. I started sleeping downstairs. The second thing I tried worked as well as the first. I stacked chairs and heavy boxes full of reams of paper before the window to see how determined this spirit was. As I should have guessed, all of the things had been removed from sight. When I peered up to the gleaming portal, it just stood alone, its expression constant, its body not feeling my desperate eyes upon the gray of its form. As a final attempt before resorting to setting actual traps to catch the beast, I told my sister to check my room after I'd gone. She was still sitting on the couch when I walked through the front door, loath to postpone her sedentary life for even a few minutes. When I returned, she reported that my room was empty and asked if I felt okay. Feeling the concerned and fearful eyes of my family members made me fearful for myself. For some weeks, I managed to come to terms with the gray being's existence. I looked at it less and less, found its presence to be of decreasing importance to me. It seemed as if we could occupy the same space in comfort, staying out of each other's way. I had almost completely forgotten about it when the tragedy came. It was a Saturday, a day I typically spend out with friends. The evening was a time of stress, relief in the form of driving around the suburbs I live in and causing a ruckus in a variety of ways. I left around 4 in the afternoon, and it was only for 26 when I received a frantic text from my mom, urging me to come home. When I got back, I looked up to my window, remembering the being that had become nearly invisible by its consistency. I froze when I saw that its gray, strange mouth was twisted upwards in a horrid smile. I burst through the front door. My mom was collapsed on the front room carpet, telephone held limply in hand. Vang just called the police. I knelt by her a few moments, comforting her in her distress, wondering where my sister was. Sentence after incoherent sentence streamed out of her mouth like dribble. So I left her there to check if the house had any clues to her distress. My natural response upon entering my house is to get upstairs to my room as soon as sociably acceptable. Logically, I will check there first. Each day I awake, I wish I hadn't looked at all. Blood coated nearly every surface, as if some explosion of red paint had sent it splattering the walls and ceiling. Parts of my sister were strewn on my bed, some of her organs lying on my desk, a good deal of her torso still and motionless in the center of my carpet. Her face had been torn off and nailed to the wall with a pencil, the eyes missing and nowhere to be found. The eye holes were ghastly, elongated things, made to look like demons' eyes by the blotted wall that was visible through them. I retched onto the crimson floor, making the stench in the room even more sickening than the hemoglobin iron smell that fucked my nostrils mercilessly. I stumbled downstairs back to my weeping mother and collapsed as she had. I did not cry, however. I only thought, and it became clear to me then, the being is too dangerous to let live. From then on, after police had come to retrieve the body and found no viable perpetrator of the crime, I spent most of my time at every public library in the county or on so-called which websites I knew to be hoaxes, ying to find a method of purging the spirit from my home. I ordered holy water purported to be bottled at the Jordan River, spread it in the still red room, only to see that same gray beast looking down upon me from within. No amount of charms or amulets or enchantments could repel the gray being. I cast protection spells, spirit wards, positive repels, waving my hands and chanting like a manic cultist. In a stupor of frustration, I tried pleading with the spirit, making a pact with it, left it offerings like it was some god to revere. Nothing could remove it from the window, and that brings me to my current state of mind. I have exhausted all possible means, save summoning a demon of my own or burning down my house. I would do the latter if I could convince my mother of the Gray Bay Eng's existence, but she always claims she can't see it when I show her its creeping vigilance. For some reason, I know nothing can rid me of this malevolence. That's why I've written this tale, this explanation of my next action. I'm going to climb onto my roof and go in through that window. I want everyone to understand why I've done this and to make sure that this does not happen again. Believe someone if they tell you that they're afraid, and believe in what causes their fear, no matter how preposterous, no matter how gray. I've tried everything I can think of. Enough is in. Oh, this journal was found on Derek E. Weinman's person on February the 17th, among other personal effects including a watch battery, a wallet containing identification, and several bills, and a packet of big league chew. Derek's time of death was 8:34 p.m. on February the 17th. Cause of death still unknown, though the official statement has been announced as suicide. No sign of a struggle or harmful chemicals found. Derek was lying face down on the floor of his room where his sister's body had been found. C. OFCL report. Case 9812. Vanessa D. Weinman. Please note that last page of quoted journal had difficult to read message. Eventually determined to say why am I so gray. Story 2. North to desert, the flawless white of the perfect SN. I'll stretch ambitiously towards the amber horizon. The immense glass walls seemed to amplify the majesty of the north to desert. I'd have been struck down by if perfection were not now a saint, able aspect of everyday life. The ochre support panels of the place of worship were delicately adorned in an array of winter flowers, bluebells, snowdrops, and Christmas roses alike had all joined together. On this special day, sometimes it felt like an exhibit, an artificial display of humanity designed to delight a higher power who could point and laugh at us and rub their face on the smudgy claw SS of our enclosure. However, today it was the chosen venue for a triumph of modern genetics. A few mumbled words and a week of feasting later, and I'd be the father-to-be of a genetically ideal child, and yet the feelings that gripped my heart were a world away from joy. Please don't misunderstand my reservations. Cade was my complete ideal. She was warm, resilient, intelligent, laid back. She is quite literally my biological match. On paper, it is not that I felt in any way unworthy of her. I could easily provide her with a happy life that will allow for the furthering of our why that is if it were possible to improve upon perfection. But as I stood there in my formal verkanst, looking down the idyllic aisle across the glacial plain, the sterility of the whole charade hit me right between the eyes. I took a few quick strides into the bathroom under the guise of wanting to go over my vows once more. When hidden from prying eyes, I set my own gaze on my unchanged reflection. I wondered at the peculiarity that my mind could go through such a vital transition, and not a modicum of it would be expressed on my face. My mismatched eyes provided the same unsettling stare the designers had decided upon when selecting my parents, one green iris, one black, the summer and the night. Well, at least that was what my mother had whispered into my ear on one of her fleeting visits to the Gentech building. When in doubt, rationalize, the party tagline played in my mind. I closed my inharmonious eyes and attempted to do just that. This marriage would only last a year, enough time to provide offspring. Then I'd be free of the restrictions of monogamy, and the child would be rushed off to the Gentech building to receive the highest standard of education and upbringing. A light knock on the door called my attention. Kate didn't wait for a response before slinking in. She delicately patted her immaculate silver blonde hair back into its inter-Kate braid. It was a mechanical gesture. I do not recall seeing tardiness as a listed aspect on your genetic profile. Her soft voice was inflectionless. She fixed me with her pale, nearly colorless eyes. They seemed almost reptilian when showered in the floral lights of the restroom. I raised the left side of my mouth up by way of response. She tilted her head to the left, her face impassive. You know, Tevja, I have had 4 children by 4 different men so far, yet you are undoubtedly my most interesting pairing. A wave of something close to compassion lapped over my frontal lobe while I wondered at having 4 children before the age of 22. This child would be her 5th and my first. Everyone from the local area had gathered to view this important, yet routine event. It appeared that I was the only one experiencing a sense of crazed unwillingness. Kate read my face with laser-like precision. She changed her conversational track, her hand once again finding its way to smooth back her hair. I wonder, Tevja, do you hesitate before stepping into the shower? Do you pause before drinking a glass of Gone? She continued, and my silence, logic spouting from her perfect face. She was the epitome of genetic perfection, a lovely little party clone. My blushing bride, her eyelids fluttered down and back up again in a carefully planned blink. I was wondering about the name. Idun for a girl, it means. To renew nature, I cut in, ending her sentence. She nodded, walking towards me, in slow measured steps. I could almost see her put on her seductive persona like a well-fitting sweater. She smoothed my shoulder-length, corn-blonde hair behind my ear and, whispering intimately, you know that this is the natural way. It's how our species survives in this hostile environment. I turned my neck slightly to really look at her exquisite face. A muscle in her cheek twitched, no doubt from the effort of holding that smile in place. I could see the contempt so close to the surface. It was then that I realized she didn't want this any more than I did. The geneticists were walking her down the aisle, just as surely as they had trapped me. Cade. My voice was softer. She covered my mouth with her hand, fear of breaking her facade. You're going to get us killed. She directed the words into my ear in a malicious whisper. All of a sudden she broke away, feigning a girly laugh and hitting me lightly on the arm. I'm afraid you'll have to wait for tonight to do that. With me, Tevja, I read the fearful warning in her eyes. It all clicked. We were being watched. That's why the church was entirely glass. Every cell in my body urged me to lean back and look through the transparent T-roof to see if I could locate the drone. Leave. My brain was pushing me towards the door. Out of it. Out of the church. Out of my allotted life. I couldn't resist the pull for long. I walked big, loping steps past Cade, out of the bathroom and under the arch of winter flowers. The door handles felt cold on my hands when I opened them. My conch fluffed up as I exited the splendid church. It was only charged for 7 hours of warmth. Then it would shrink back down to thin indoor material, and the shivering would start. Why on earth would anyone want to go into the desert for more than 7 hours anyway? I walked out into the vast expanse of snow, realizing that I had outgrown my willful ignorance and gilded cage. I could not subject an innocent child to a parental falsity of an existence. The rhythmic sound of my steps crunching on the ice brought my Gen Tech education to the forefront of my mind. Never go out onto the frozen tundra. Nothing survives out there, including you. How are you going to further our elite society if you're dead? I could still smell my sexless Gen Tech teacher's herbal cigarette. The pressure of her hand on the top of my head was almost unbearable as she patronizingly ruffled my hair. She laughed at my suggestion that I would be an explorer when I grew up. From that moment onwards I was a sullen, quiet student. Stage 1. Uncontrollable shivering. 5 beads of sweat made a gallant attempt to cross my forehead before being welded to my face. There they remain like a glacial crown. All hail the king of this wasteland of humanity. My conscript had run out of charge 15 minutes and 21 seconds ago. My fingers trembled, unbidden, a constant reminder of that fact. The wind howled maddeningly in my ears, as if 80,000 voices were screaming at me in a language I couldn't understand. My feet strode dutifully forwards, always striving for me to return to my kingdom. Stage 2. Numbness. My blinks became increasingly inefficient, only occasionally managing to remove the buildup of snow from my eyes. I watched a snowflake fall slowly down, its perfect individuality being lost amongst a homogenized snowfield. What did it matter anyway? Are we not all going to fade out of existence eventually, as separate as we are? Are we not all united in our inevitable end? My mind was slow, spinning off on tangents, floating and soaring with a gentle snowdrift. Only one thought had clarity. I regretted that there was not a single individual to hold me down to this earth, no ties to keep. My soul housed in my body. I was unbound, I was free. Stage 3. A feeling of warmth spreads through your body. I was alone. Stage 4. You enter a period of semi-consciousness. I smiled a sardonic smile on frozen lips as my lethargic mind jammed the puzzle pieces together. I had, through some horrendous genetic accident, developed my own brain. Worse still, it was untainted by the party bullshit. The desolate expanse of the Norse desert had never felt more like home, for it was as alone as I, for just as the frozen expanse was unequipped to sustain life, I was unequipped to live. Out of foolish lie, I suppose there's a grim glory in being a martyr for your cause. Stage 5. Unconsciousness. The snow was piling up on me, a comforting blanket pressing me into sleep. Ice had cement. Had my eyes shut. When in doubt, rationalize. Never mind. There was nothing more I wished to see anyway. Stage 6. Death. Story 3. Have you ever wondered at the mystery of sleep? Have you ever pondered at the mystery of sleep? That dark unknown of time, when our conscious reality slips away and only slippery fragments of strange and obscure memories, called dreams, occasionally cling to the outer reaches of our minds in a broken, hazy recording of this lost period of our lives. In our waking moments, we moan and begrudge those elements that try to control our fleeting time awake. The daily jobs that fill our hours with rarely any visible impact on the world around us, the relationships we must adapt to and work on to maintain, the laws and cues and pathways and schedules and a million other things that curtail and bind us daily. And yet, how easily we abandon this control we value so highly and moan about so often. Every day when we close our eyes in that respect, I guess we see it as an escape, a fleeting release from the daily realities of a life both thrust upon us and equally one we have enlisted into sleep, a state of nothingness that offers nothing except a cessation of the need to care. Think about how we describe it. We fall asleep. We drift into unconsciousness. Tiredness overwhelms us. The act of sleep, too. U.S. 'tis an abandoning of control, of loosening our hands on the reins of our lives and giving ourselves over completely to a temporary oblivion. Like millions of others, I used to like that feeling, that drowsiness at the end of the day, sinking into the warm seclusion of blanket and pillow, unconsciously releasing the mental tethers to my body, turning off at the end of the day. Until now, until the day I didn't sleep, or rather remembered that I do not sleep, that none of us ever truly sleep. I laid in bed, I adjusted my pillows, I moved the covers. I checked the messages on my phone and surfed the web for a while. Nothing, no drowsiness, no drooping of the eyelids, no slowdown of my thoughts. Nothing I anticipated happening as it had thousands upon thousands of times before. Then a niggling sensation touched me. An errant thought from the basest, darkest part of my mind suddenly sparked into existence. It spread and grew, spilling out memories my conscious mind could not access during my waking hours, but which now, when I laid myself down to sleep, came tumbling back up like bile from the pit of my stomach to fill my mind with sick realization, and with memory came understanding. I was awake. I had always been awake, just like everyone else in the world had always been awake. Sleep was an illusion, a pre-programmed period of darkness in our memories, activated between a single blink of our eyes when we sought our beds to retreat into soothing unconsciousness. Every imagined period of sleep was this, a frozen sliver of personal time. I rose and looked back, leaving my body behind as my consciousness cut loose. I observed my body, wrapped in its covers, the shallow breathing, the closed eyelids, empty, like a vehicle left with the engine idling, waiting for its driver to return. I turned and saw without eyes today's handler arrive within the room. Mentally I gave it form, for in truth it had none. My mind conjured one to match the sullen age. Hatred I felt for it, a dark storm cloud of smoke turning inward and devouring itself over and over without end. For that's how I interpreted its actions. A formless beast that constantly drew things in, but gave nothing back. I watched in frozen loathing as dark, thorny tendrils emerged from its roiling mass and moved toward my detached consciousness. Whilst pain is the remit of the body, it is the mind that interprets the signals, and my handler, as with all the handlers I had experienced before, were nothing if not experts in these sensations. I felt the searing touch of its joining, its own mental threads writhing through my mind, sending me off into wild tangents of thought and memory as it settled comfortably into my consciousness. The house guest of my mind sought sensation, and whilst it gave nothing of its own thoughts, its motives were always clear enough, the need to feel. Bodiless, they had sought out beings such as we, and during those times when we believe, we slept soundly and untroubled in our beds, they settled upon our minds like a thick, oily slick, sliding into all the nooks and crannies of our being. Maybe they had never felt before, or had done so in some far and distant past and had grown beyond the limits of flesh, but now wanted to sample the sensation of feeling once more. And they had found us. They didn't want to risk us rejecting them, fighting them, as we would have in response to open subjugation. So they came at night, hidden outside our sight, our space, our time even, except for that moment when our bodies were required to rest, yet our minds continue. And they had hijacked us en masse. They have hidden that part of our lives from us, and in our enforced ignorance we have given that unknowing key of slavery a seemingly harmless name, sleep. Only during that blink of time, when our consciousness frees itself from our bodies, do we remember. And with remembrance comes pain. It all comes flooding back, and they intend this too. For in these memories are all the things they have made us live through. This recollection alone brings a sharp, twisting agony to us that thrills them more than any other. Apart and within our minds they create, picking apart our pasts and sorting through our memories. The experiences of our lives are laid out before them, which they chat, like eager children, constructing nightmarish worlds of jumbled thought and sensation. Most are fragmentary experiences, but some are shards, jagged-edged thoughts, and feelings tied to darker memory. Yes, and it is these our handlers seek to build our nighttime worlds from. Then they loose us on these imaginary planes, living out new stories from our memories, teasing out new feelings for the to experience. Sometimes we live whole lives, but mostly it is the short, sharp thrills they seek, whose fleeting glimpse we catch only as flickers of forgotten terror and dreams of falling from great heights, or being hunted by the monsters of our subconscious. And sometimes we are killers ourselves, and we awake shivering, wondering what this says about us, when in truth it says more about them. They use us to fulfill these dark fantasies, but the confusion and the guilt becomes our own. And when they are finally done and have had their fill, they release their control, but not before burying these memories deep inside us. Some of these memories escape and seep out into our conscious minds. We call them dreams and pay them little credence. Would society survive if we all knew what happens when we close our eyes to seek the illusory escape of sleep? How could we continue to perform even the smallest action, maintain the semblance of order we have built for ourselves, if our waking moments were in a state of continual dread, awaiting that inevitable time when our frail minds and bodies give in to the demands of tiredness and become lost to us once more, to those things that use our lives and experiences to provide entertainment for their own. For myself, here I stand with the wind whipping around my legs, tugging at me, threatening to pull me over this roof edge as I gaze down the floors beneath to the gray monotony of the pavement below. I'm tired, so very tired, and soon I will rest, but it's not enough, nowhere near enough. When I can hold on no longer, and that final blink before sleep takes me, then I shall fall. There is no opportunity to test this theory, just a wild final hope that my release will also serve as a warning to them, a message that, although they own us during that forever frozen moment of our nights, some of us remember. And this one will do more than just remember, this nightmarish recall of all the why have done to me in the past. these harsh memories they have hidden within me, as they do to all of us. This has given me power. The struggle to hold on to these dreams has given me strength, trained me to hold on to all those thoughts they try to bury within us. I will use this last remaining strength when I fall, when today's handler comes to call, and I will entwine my thoughts in theirs and hold them fast, and I will take it with me. But before I do, I will mail this from my phone. Not many will believe it. Most will think me mad, but enough may wonder and question. Most will throw away a few seconds thinking about it, then move on to another story. But some will ask themselves those questions that I myself asked. Indeed, that one question in particular, or that will plague you as you settle down to sleep tonight, but thankfully will plague me no longer. Do you remember the precise moment you fall asleep? Story for the choice in the fields he had stopped, paid running, but only because he couldn't run anymore. His foot had hit a stalk at just the perfect angle to leave him face first in the dry dirt that tore through his shirt, blooded his elbows, and sprained his right ankle. He had found himself completely immobilized. He tried twice to get back onto his feet, but there was no way. He'd heard the disgusting pop. When he fell, he'd rolled his ankle, and in a bad way. He was too young to know exactly what had happened, but he was old enough to know it wasn't good. Both times he had attempted to get up, and both times he had fallen with a whimper of pain. He pulled his foot towards him with considerable effort, just to get a closer look at it. To his dismay, it had already turned a deeper red in color. There was no way he was going any further, but he had to. His leg was nothing but a momentary distraction from the unfortunate situation he was in. It only took a single howl for him to remember it was still coming. He shot his glance upwards, back the way he'd come, down the row of endless corn. Down at the ground level, he could see quite a ways, and to his excitement he saw nothing. Only the rows and hours of corn greeted his gaze. He couldn't hear anything. Either the crows had stopped their incessant calls, and the silence should have filled him with a comfort. It did. For a moment he wondered if maybe he'd imagined the call. Maybe it wasn't coming. But then the silence really set in. It was painfully heavy, collapsing in around him and squeezing his lungs. His breath hurried, trying to compensate. He realized that the silence meant that thing could be anywhere. Maybe he couldn't hear it coming because it was already upon him, watching from somewhere close by. That weight was lifted by the second call. It sounded closer. That thing was definitely getting closer, and he couldn't move. He felt warm tears as he tried to think. Walking was out of the question, but he knew that if he stayed there it would have him. Whatever it wasn't going to just give up or lose him. It knew he was in the field. It was coming, so the boy decided he had to do the only thing left to do. He started to crawl. He dragged himself across the rough, stalk-laden dirt up the corn rows towards the afternoon sun. Every time he dug his rod, scratched elbows until the dirt it made him wince and gasp, but he tried to push past it. He was tough, just like his daddy told him he was tough. So he moved forward ever so slowly, but constantly. His spirit wasn't gone yet, and he was determined. He wasn't exactly hopeful, though. There was no way, he was sure of it. There was no way that he could carry himself out of this field before it had found him, before it could take him. It was this slow, drowning realization that seemed to add 50 pounds to his small body and pull the fight out of him. There was no way, and as he began to weep, he heard it, a rustling from the distance behind him, only audible because of the dead silence in the air. At first he thought it was something small, a bird, a light breeze, anything that wasn't the thing, but, of course, it wasn't the wind, it wasn't a bird. Something was moving through the corn stalks, and fast he turned unwillingly, and he lay for the longest time, seconds in reality, but minutes in his racing mind, he watched. The row remained as it was, empty, nothing to be seen. As it should be, the foot came out of nowhere, heedlessly, right as it emerged from the route to his left, more than 70 yards away. It had emerged, and then, before the boy knew it, it had propelled the slender, black thing sideways across the row. It took about 10 seconds before he saw it ruin his view again, this time one more row forward, one row closer. It was moving towards him, sweeping side to side. There was no hiding from it, and the boy knew it. The boy, finally freed from his fear, noticed that a small rogue batch of corn grew a little thicker to his left across one of the columns. Perhaps, just perhaps, he would be less noticeable there. At least, that's what his frightened mind told him. The corn had to help, because it couldn't possibly hurt. The child moved his body into the small patch, and there he could load only ball up and prepare. He heard the whooshing and cracking as the thing raced through the fields, its hunt ongoing, and soon it come to its grisly conclusion. He used all of his will to keep from making a single sound. Even as he wept, it would overlook him. He hoped it would just pass him by. He bit his lip and wished he could wake up. Then it happened. The boy heard him, and his eyes widened, but this time it was in astonishment and disbelief. A quick smile crossed his cheeks as the warm sound came to his ears. Hope ignited inside him like a bonfire, and he turned. He heard his father and his father's friends calling his name, sound he'd ever heard. Hope returned to the boy. Again, his happiness was overtaken by that thing. It had halted, if only for a moment, at the voices of the approaching farmers, and he saw it do so. Its form, obscured by the corn, halted and turned its nightmarish visage towards the boy's father. For a moment, the boy had another fear. What if the thing went after his father? Did he have his gun? Could he defend himself? Would it hurt his dad? He swore the thing would dart straight through the fields, turning all of its focus to his father. But instead it had begun running again across the rows, faster than it had been before. It was speeding up. It had turned its full attention to finding and collecting the child, to hunting high. And then came the dilemma. The boy wanted to cry out to his father. He wanted to shout. He wanted to cry. And he wanted to scream. But he realized that the only thing that kept whatever that CR teacher was from taking him out right that second was the sole fact that it had no idea where he was. It only knew that he had started running away, and possibly that he had fallen. It probably knew he had fallen. That's why it was searching the ground. He figured as such. His father and his father's friends sounded closer than that thing, but he couldn't see them. Even if he called to them now, he knew that the chances of the beast reaching him first were high, too high for his comfort. He faced forward, and now the creature was only about 50 yards away, and he could make out its figure more clearly in the fields. The speed was remarkable, and it was the singular most horrifying thing about his pursuer. Its ungodly speed. Turning around, he saw movement in the corn. His father was getting close, almost as close as the thing was on the other end. He was sandwiched between the two, and he had an important choice to make. So he closed his eyes. In the darkness, all was the same. There was a rustling and a cracking from in front, and the snapping and calling from his rear. That thing and his father both were closing in, faster and faster. There was only one thing he could do to possibly help. Either his father would pick him up and fight the thing off, or the thing would steal him away, never to be seen again. The choice was made when he turned back around and opened his eyes just enough to see his father moving sideways through the field. He had started moving away from his son. His heart sank when his father disappeared from view, and the creature still came closer. He could only mouth no, no, no as his father and his hope faded from sight. That thing, however, was still coming at him. His fate was sealed. The boy closed his eyes. He knew would happen. The whooshing from in front was nearly upon him, and his father's grew slightly fainter. He clenched his teeth. There was the final irrational thought that maybe it would miss him, maybe it would, but then it was too much to risk. There was only one thing he could do. A final act of pure desperation. The child called out, and they all heard. Story 5. Ickbar Bigglestein. When I was a small child, I was terrified of the dark. I still am, but back when I was around 6 years old, I couldn't go a full night without crying out for one of my parents to search beneath my bed or in my closet for whatever monster I thought was waiting to eat me. Even with a night light, I would still see dark shapes moving around the corners of the room, or strange faces looking in on me from my bedroom window. My parents would do their best to console me, telling me that it was just a bad dream or a trick of the light, but in my young mind I was positive that the second I fell asleep, the bad things would get me. Most of the time I would just hide under the blankets until I became tired enough to stop worrying, but every now and then I would become so panicked that I would run screaming into my parents' room, waking up my brother and sister in the process. After an ordeal like that, here would be no way anyone would be getting a full night's rest. Eventually, after one particularly traumatizing night, my parents had had enough. Unfortunately for them, they understood the futility in arguing with a 6-year-old and knew that they would be unable to convince me to rid myself of childish fears through reason and logic. They had to be clever. It was my mother's idea stitch together my little bedtime friend. She collected a large assortment of random pieces of fabric and her sewing machine and created what I would later refer to as Mr. Ickbar Bigglestein, or Ick for short. Ick was a sock monster, as my mother called him. He was made to keep me safe while I slept at night by scaring away all the other monsters. He was pretty damn creepy, I had to admit. Honestly, looking back on it all now, I'm still impressed that my mom could think of something so strange and disturbing looking. Ickbar had the stitched-together look of a Frankenstein gremlin with big white button eyes and floppy cat ears. His little arms and legs were made from a pair of my sister's black and white striped socks, and the half of his face that was gray and was made from one of my brother's tall football socks. His head could have been described as bulbous, and for his mouth my mom attached a piece of white fabric and sewed in a zigzag pattern to shape a wide grin of sharp teeth. I loved him at once. From then on, it never left my side, so long as it was after dusk, of course. Hick didn't like the sun and would get upset if I'd right to bring him to school with me, but that was okay. I only needed him at night to keep away the boogeyman, which was what he was good at. So every night at bedtime, Hick would tell me where the monsters were hiding, and I would place him near the section of my room closest to the spookiness. If there was something in the closet, Hick would block the door. If there was a dark creature scratching at my window, Hick would be pressed up against the glass. If there was a big hairy beast under my bed, then under the bed he went. Sometimes the monsters weren't even in my room. Sometimes they would hide in my dreams, and Iqbar would have to come with me into my nightmares. It was fun bringing Ick into my dream world, as he and I would spend hours fighting off ghouls and demons. The best part was, in my dreams, Ick could talk to me for real. "How much do you love me?" he would ask. More than anything, I would always tell him. One night in a dream, after I had lost my first tooth, Ick asked me for a favor. "Can I have your tooth?" I asked him why. "To help me kill the bad things," he said. The next morning at breakfast, my mom asked me where my tooth went. From what she told me, the tooth fairy didn't find it under my pillow. When I told her that I gave it to Iqbar, she just shrugged and went back to feeding my little sister. From then on, every time I lost a tooth, I would give it to Ick. He would always thank me, of course, and tell me that he loved me. Eventually, though, I ran out of baby teeth, and I was beginning to get a little too old to still be playing with dolls. So Ick just sat there on my bookshelf collecting dust, slowly fading away from my attention. Over time, the nightmares, however, became worse than ever, so bad that they even began to follow me to the waking world, terrorizing every dark corner or rustle in the bushes. After one particularly bad night biking home from a friend's house where I swore a pack of rabid dogs were chasing me, I got home to find something strange waiting for me in my room. There, on my bed, standing fully upright in the soft glow of the moonlight from my window, was Iqbar. At first I just thought my eyes were playing tricks on me again. They had been all evening, so I tried to flick on the lights. Another flick of the light switch, then another and another, with no change to the darkness. It was then that I started to get nervous. I backed away slowly towards the door behind me, my eyes never leaving the shape of Ike's silhouette, my hand wardly outstretched behind, reaching for the doorknob. I was just about to get my ass out of there when I heard the door slam itself shut, locking me into blackness and nothing but shadows and silence. I stood frozen in place, not even breathing. For how long I can't say, but after what felt like a lifetime of cold fear, I heard the shrill, familiar voice. "You stopped heading me, so why should I protect you?" "Protect me from what?" "Let me show you." I blinked once, and everything changed. I wasn't in my bedroom anymore. I was somewhere else. It wasn't hell, but the comparison wasn't far off. It was some sort of forest, a horrible, nightmarish place where partial embryonic abortions hung from the canopy and the ground swarmed with carnivorous insects a thick fog wafted deep through the air, and with it the stench of rotting meat, while chartreuse lightning flashed across the night sky. In the distance I could hear the agonizing screams of something not quite hum, and my head throbbed like it was about to explode, the pain forcing out a river of tears. In my mind I heard his voice again. This is what your reality would become without me. I felt earth-shaking footsteps approaching fast. I'm the only one who can stop it. It was behind me now, huge and angry, hot breath across my back. Bring me what I need, and I will. I woke up before I could turn around. The following day I raided my parents' closet for my brother's baby teeth, giving them all to Igbar. Almost immediately the night terrors ceased, and I Washington S. more or less able to go on about my life as normal. From time to time I would have to sneak into my little sister's room and snatch what was meant for the tooth fairy or strangle one of the neighborhood cats and pry out its sharp little incisors. Anything to ward off the visions, anything from a shark tooth necklace to a cavity ridden by cuspid. I also began to notice that it would move Abo at my room whenever I left for any length of time, rearranging my stuff and hanging additional curtains. He was even beginning to look more lifelike, somehow. In the right light his teeth would glisten, and he was warm to the touch. As much as he creeped me out, I couldn't work up the courage to just destroy him, knowing perfectly well where that would leave me. So I went on collecting teeth for it throughout all of high school and college. The older I got, the more things I would learn to fear, the more teeth it would need to keep me safe. I'm 22 years old, now with a decent job, my own apartment, and a set of dentures. It's been almost a month since Ike's last meal, and the horrors are starting to crowd around me once more. I took a detour through a parking garage after work tonight, found a man fumbling with his car keys. His teeth were stained yellow from a lifetime of cigarettes and coffee. Even still, I had to use a hammer to get out the molars. When I got back to my apartment, he was waiting for me on the ceiling in the corner, to white eyes and mouth of razors. "How much do you love me?" he asks. "More than anything," I reply, taking off my coat. "More than anything in the world." Story 6. You left your lights on. The moment I stepped out of my house, I knew I had made a mistake. I could hear my mother cry, NG, on the other side of my front door, and the frigid air that filled the cold October night felt particularly painful on my exposed skin. I had just decided to go on a run. That's what I usually do to Dester or calm down when I get angry. My mother and I had just got into a pretty heated argument about my grades, and I said some things I definitely shouldn't have. I thought it would be okay if I just left for a little while and allowed the both of us to calm down a bit. I bent down to relace my shoes, and I took a deep breath. The cold air stung my throat as it filled my lungs, and I noticed just how thirsty I was. Despite this, I stood back up and started off into the inky, black darkness that filled the night. It was a particularly dark night. The moon seemed to be missing from the sky, and living on a distant gravel road. There were no street lights. I know it's dangerous to run at night without any lights or reflective gear, but the alternative was to be yelled at, and I certainly wasn't going to be having any more of that. As I reached the end of my driveway, I turned left onto the familiar parallel road and began to run. By now, my eyes had adjusted to the darkness, and I could see pretty far in the distance. I gradually started to accelerate as I got into the swing of the run, and I settled into a comfortable but fast pace. As the cold breeze beat against my face, I shivered. I couldn't help but feel as if something was wrong. I guess I had spooked myself, because I started to jump at every little thing that moved. At one point, the wind had picked up a little and caused a branch of a distant tree to sway. I convinced myself something was waiting for me down the road, but as I drew closer, I realized my monster's sightings were nothing more than childish delusions. As I continued to run down the road, I thought about the moments that had led up to my run, and I couldn't help but feel bad about W. And I had said to my mom before I had stormed out of the house, "You see, she was doing her best to raise my little brother and I." My dad left on deployment earlier that month, and needless to say, my mom lost a good part of her happiness when he left. My thoughts started to wander from the subject when I saw a pair of lights ahead on the road. Strange, I thought. Parallel was a pretty barren road, being at least 15 miles from any sort of civilization in either direction. That, coupled with the fact that it was 11:30 at night, it was pretty strange to see any sort of signs of life out. As I ran closer, the source of the light became more and more clear. About 100 feet from the light, I could clearly make out a small white car that was parked in the middle of the road. Its headlights were on, and it just sat stationary with no signs of a driver. I stared at the car, trying to make sense of things, but eventually I just ran past it. I ran from the car for about a mile and started to slow my pace. I was at least 3 miles out now, and the frigid air was taking its toll on my dry throat. I decided to turn around. I ran down the road for about a mile, and I noticed something a little strange. For one, the car was missing, but that didn't concern me. Where the car used to be, there was a horrible, gut-wrenching stench. I honestly had never smelled anything quite as bad as this. I can remember dry heaving a couple of times as I ran, desperate to get away from whatever was making that horrible smell. Eventually, I escaped the area from where the smell permeated. Not long after, I noticed something else down the road. I saw the same two lights I had seen before, only this time they were facing the other way, directly at me. The lights seemed to be stationary again, so I assumed the car was parked like it was before. As I drew closer to the car, I found that my assumptions were correct. The car was no different from the time I first saw it, though I could make out a faint black figure in the driver's seat of the car. The figure wasn't moving, so I assumed they had fallen asleep somehow. I decided to wake them up and see if they needed help. "Hey!" I shouted as I drew near to the car. I slowed my pace and stood next to the driver's window. I noticed the window was rolled down. "And you left your lights on. I just wanted to know if you needed any help." What happened next I will never forget. The dark figure turned its head towards me and opened its eyes. My heart started to pound as I stared at whatever was sitting in that car. The eyes that stared back at me were completely red and seemed to glow in contrast to the darkness that filled the car. It opened its mouth and let out a loud screech. At this moment I turned away and ran. I ran faster than I had ever run before. My heart was pounding as if it was trying to escape from my chest, and my breathing heightened in a desperate attempt to supply my body with enough oxygen. What I heard next filled me with dread, the rolling of tires. The car was turning to face me once again. I didn't know what to do. In a frightened panic, I threw my body into the foliage that lined the road and found myself in a ditch. I looked up ever so slightly. I held my breath as I watched. Had the lights of the car light up the road just in front of me? Whatever was driving that car was looking for me. The car slowly drove along and, luckily, past my hiding place among the reeds and grass. I waited for what seemed like an eternity. Then, very slowly, I raised my head to check my surroundings and got up, brushing bits of grass from my shorts. I mustered up the courage to run making sure to check the distance for any cars. I reached home about 12 minutes later. I sprinted up my driveway, opened my front door, and slammed it shut behind me, making sure to lock it. The house was dark apart from a couple of lights, so my mom and my brother were probably in bed. Still spooked, I slowly crept around my house, first to the back door, locking it, then to my room. I walked over to my bed and collapsed on it. I was shaking, and, quite frankly, just wanted the night to end. Before I could fall asleep, however, I was alerted by a light coming from my window. I sat on my bed and watched a small white car pull up in my driveway. It parked right in front of my window and shut off lights and everything. I started to sob. I could make out a pair of large red eyes in the car, and they were staring directly at me. Paralyzed with fear, I stared back, but I must have fallen asleep at some point, because I woke the next morning on my bed in front of my window. The first thing I did was glance outside. There was no car in sight. I chuckled in relief. It must have been a dream, I told Miss F out loud. I got out of bed and changed into some sweatpants. I noticed that I was so tired the night before that I had forgot to turn the lights off in my room before I got in bed. I flipped the leg HT switch to FF, then I walked out of my room and made my way into the kitchen. "Good morning," I said to my mom, who was sitting at the table with a mug of hot coffee in her hand. She looked troubled, but returned the phrase and invited me to sit with her. "Bevan, I need to ask you something." "Sure," I replied, rubbing my eyes. "Did you notice anything strange on your run last night?" We stared at each other for a moment in silence. "Why?" I asked weakly. "The police came by this morning," she told me. "They found a body of a man who had apparently been murdered very violently. He was about 2 miles down, just strewn across the road. All they found at the scene of the crime was a message." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. Scrawled in red ink was a message. "Story 7. The man in black. I had to grow up when I was 6. I had 2 little brothers that depended on me. Liam was 2, and John was just a baby. Our parents were going through a nasty divorce, and suddenly the children were just a burden that neither wanted to tend to. I was the one who made sure we ate, bathed, wore clean clothes, changed diapers, and taught the boys how to pee in the potty when it came time for that. I also stopped believing in Santa, the Tooth Fairy, the Easter Bunny, sugar plums, and gumdrops, which meant I also didn't believe in anything that went bump in the night I couldn't believe in. Those things I had to be the grown-up. I had to be Santa, the Tooth Fairy, the Easter Bunny, and I had to chase away the things that we bump in the night. My brothers were terrified of the dark and the things that lived under the bed and in the closet. So every night before bed I would take a brown paper lunch bag and chase away the things from under the bed and in the closet. I'd catch them in my bag and then I'd stomp on the bag, thus killing the monsters. With lots of praise from the boys, we all sleep in the same bed. It was easier that way. I knew where they were at all times then. Things stayed that way as we grew up. The boys knew they could count on me above our parents any time they needed something. Even after the divorce, the neglect never stopped. We sort of fended for ourselves. When I graduated high school, things started to change for me. I started to become angry at the way my life was. I resented my parents, and I hate to admit it, but I started to resent the boys, even though none of it was their fault. So I ran away. I ran away with a boy my age who had joined the Marines. Our life together started in Florida and ended in North Carolina. The boy was secretly an abusive drug addict. I came home broken. That's when I met my husband, Tim, who was different than anything I had ever encountered. He's kind and gentle and works hard to make sure I know I am loved, which was a feeling I never knew before. I had 2 children with him, 2 girls, Gina and Melanie. That is when the nightmares started. That is when I started to believe in the things that went bump in the night. I don't know if the process of childbirth makes one feel and know things they previously thought didn't exist. But after Gina was born, I started having horrible nightmares. The nightmares were so vivid they would put Wes Craven's Nightmare on Elm Street Oh shame, then the day after the nightmare I would see the subject of the nightmare out and about, as if I were being stalked. Normally the nightmare was of a man in all black choking me, his hands, gloved, wrapped tightly around my neck. My husband normally wakes me from these dreams. I scream out, I fight, I kick and punch. I woke with cold sweats, but the next day out in town, I'd catch glimpses of him here or there. Over the years I thought it was just coincidence, that there must have been someone in town who wore a black jacket like the man in my dreams. It wasn't until the man started being literally everywhere I was that I started to worrying. One hot summer's day at the farmer's market I saw him. The man in black, I saw him across the market place briefly. It startled me so that I dropped my basket. I quickly retrieved my belongings and looked again, and he was gone. It had to be the man. Why would a man be wearing a black leather jacket in 90-degree heat? That night I had the nightmare again. Same man in black with his hands around my throat. I scratched his face under his right eye. The man yelled a curse and bit me on my left shoulder. My husband woke me again. We turned the light on and he ran to get water while I caught my breath. He came into the room and looked at me and said, "Baby, you're bleeding." I was confused, but he ran up to me and put pressure on my left shoulder. Once the bleeding had stopped, we were able to see what the cause of it was. I had a deep bite mark on my shoulder. I broke down and told my husband of my dream. How could something that happened in a dream appear suddenly on my body? I could understand a random bruise, since I tend to wrestle the air, but a physical bite mark was unexplainable. I called my best friend in the morning, and Shauna and I agreed that I could use some time away from the house. Shauna and I went to the mall to walk around and people watch. People watching was a fun pastime of ours. We quite enjoy picking out morons at the mall and secretly laughing at them. It always makes me feel better. While we were people watching, I saw him again. He looked right at me, and he had scratches underneath his right eye. We stared at each other for a moment before he turned to leave. He was leaving Hot Topic and heading towards J.C. Penney's. I needed to know who he was, why he was everywhere I was, and why he was in my head. I tried getting to him, but a gaggle of teenage girls suddenly burst out Claire's in front of me, and he was gone again. I didn't know what to do. This was getting very real. Why would he have the scratches? Why did I have a bite? I needed help. Shauna, who is also clairvoyant, told me I need to speak my mother. I asked her why, but she said all she knew was she was getting a strong feeling that I needed to talk to my mother, and that was all she knew. I hadn't spoken to my mother in 15 years. As soon as I graduated high school, I left and never looked back, but I trusted Shauna. I knew if Shauna said I needed to do something, I needed to do something. So I called my mother. Hello, is this Donna? Yes. Who is this? Elizabeth, your daughter. That's impossible. My daughter is dead. No, I am not. I am alive. And, well, I am married. I have 2 children. And I need to speak to you. My mom sighed heavily on the other end of the line. I thought you were dead, and that is why it had ended. Not because you had children. What are you talking about? I asked. You are being stalked by a man in black, aren't you? I stayed silent for a minute or two before my mom went into the story of the man in black. Papa, Redley, he is a curse. He has been haunting women in my family for generations. So long the reason for the curse was no longer known. He will follow, hunt the mother until the next daughter has children or the next daughter is dead. This is the reason for my parents' divorce. This is the reason my mother was distant while we were growing up. She didn't want to get close to me. She harbored homicidal thoughts towards me my entire life to end the curse that was upon her. She hated herself for it, so she didn't want a relationship with me. There is no other way to break the curse. When I asked my mother how she survived the curse without a spouse to wake her from her nightmares, she told me she had her alarm clock go off hourly. It took a toll on her, but at least the man in black couldn't claim Anno. Their victim, I knew what I had to do. The man in black is after blood. He will not stop until he takes a female of my bloodline. He will continue to torture us until that day. So that night I bought a bottle of sleeping pills and crushed 3 or 4 up into Tim's tea, being careful not to give him a lethal amount, just enough to keep him asleep. When the man in black comes, I tucked my daughters into bed and said them one last time, and then I went to sleep myself. The man in black came as predicted. He took my life as predicted. My cause of death went down to undiagnosed sleep apnea. I watch over my family now. Their sadness keeps me here. It's odd. I thought I'd be tethered to the man in black for all eternity, but once he took me, I never saw him again. At least I am free of him. 23 years later, that bastard, that sorry bastard, Gina had a baby. She had a baby girl. And now the man in black is back. He is haunting my daughter. There is no way to break the curse and my curses, to watch it happen to my family for generations to come.